another episode of I Bought a Farm.
Yes, sir.
Episode 3 this time. Yeah, so we're getting these moving now. All right, you've got 2 to chew on. You've
Better
got some,
late than never.
You've got some side videos, to go after. We're getting a little bit of a routine here. We've got another guest today, which is cool. But I think one of the things that I won't necessarily say was frustrating for me, but was kind of unbeknownst to me going into buying these properties is, first of all, if you finance a piece of ground, that lender is going to require some sort of insurance. And it varies by property. For instance, if you have just a raw piece of land, it may be a small liability policy. If it has a structure on it, like my properties do, you will be required to have some sort of structure insurance on the structures on the property. And that seems pretty simple, right? Most of us who own houses have a standard homeowner's insurance policy.
And it is, unless it's a small home on 500 acres.
Yes.
Because then how does an insurance policy apply to the rest of the
property?
property?
It doesn't really. So my policies only cover the structures on there. That's what the lender cared about. Hey, just cover those structures because you're not going to damage the land enough to depreciate the value.
Perfect.
But what I found was hard is that in my case, one of the structures has a wood burner. It's a camp. It's a deer camp. And because that wood burner exists in a structure on that property, most insurance companies wouldn't touch me, wouldn't cover anything, and it was super frustrating. And then I finally got one to do it. And I've got some old tobacco barns on the property. And they basically said, hey, those are liabilities. You either have to knock those down or we're canceling your insurance policy. They're 150 years old. I'm not going to knock them down. That's a cool piece of the property. And so it took me several loops through the insurance process to figure out okay, here's now one. I pay a little higher premium, but they represent farms. That's what they do. They know that they're going to have wood burners. They know that there's going to be old barns on the property. And so that's kind of where I'm at. But we're not necessarily focusing on just that aspect today as much as just liability of being a landowner. And it's something that we probably have all neglected in the past, especially if we weren't landowners, if we were on a buddy's property or family property. The fact is we were a liability on that property. If something happened to us on that property, there has to be some policy protecting that landowner from us suing them, basically.
Well, and dude, over the course of the early 2000s, it seems like it's brought us into an era where everybody is aware of liability at this point. Mm-hmm. Not only that they potentially are owning, but also, and unfortunately, the ability to take advantage of that.
Yep.
And so that can come in the form of a permission hunter, which is something, we're going to talk about today, or even people that don't have permission to be there. Mm-hmm. If somebody trespasses onto your land or wanders on there, and is injured, ultimately you as the landowner could be held liable for that. So I think that's kind of where we're going to steer this conversation today.
Yep. So we've got Sean Ferbrache of the American Hunting Lease Association on. And so Sean's...
You did good with that.
Thanks. Yeah. AHLA. Sean's company is kind of unique in two ways. Number one is, and we're going to get into this in the podcast, is typically Sean's company is providing people who are looking to lease property with the tools to provide security for that landowner, right? To make them feel comfortable leasing a property to you. I would assume, and Sean will tell us, part of their business is to hunters who want to provide that to a landowner they're leasing from. Some of that might be to a landowner who's looking to lease his property out directly. But the other aspect of it is this new vacant land insurance, basically, or liability coverage. And we're going to get into that with Sean because essentially, even if somebody trespasses on your property, if that person gets hurt, you're still liable. It's still your property that they got hurt on, whether they were welcome or not, which in today's society seems ridiculous, but it happens more and more. So, I think what we're really going to cover with Sean are some of these cool points of opportunities of engaging with landowners even prior to, call it, selling or buying a property, or even that property being on the market. And you and I always say, we're looking out for deals. I think most of those deals happen prior to that property ever hitting the market.
Yeah.
Well,
dude, you're right on. This is one of the early phases of, and not every property purchase obviously starts out this way, but a lot of people may be aware of a property that they want to purchase. It's like an aging or an uninterested landowner. Mm-hmm. And the first step might be permission, and to obtain that permission, you're going to be in a better position if you bring some protection along with you. Because I can tell you right now, an overwhelming majority of the no's that I get from landowners that I go and ask to hunt is because of their concern with liability.
Yeah, fear.
And so if your first foot forward is, hey, I've got protection on this already, I'm paying for an insurance policy for me to hunt on your land or anybody else who gives me permission, man, that's, first of all, impressive that you've done that work to begin with. And I think it's the great start of a relationship that, may ultimately end in a purchase.
I think it's one block of a no as well, and that they can't come back and say, well, you're not insured to.
And it's not a guarantee that they will say yes because you have insurance,
but it's one step in the right direction. Yeah. So, let's bring Sean on and get into this conversation on the I Bought a Farm podcast. Hey, Sean, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing good, man. We appreciate you coming on the I Bought a Farm podcast. It's our third episode, a little early into the step on this, but it's really quickly becoming obvious to us, and we kind of know it, but there's so many facets of land access and land ownership, and especially we just kind of touched on it opening this podcast, things around insurance and liability, and it's something that probably as normal hunters, I don't think most of us even consider insurance and liability.
Oh, I'm sure most don't. And I think a lot of that pushback on, leasing even in the Midwest for sure is around that lack of understanding or lack of empathy that hunters who possibly have hunted a farm or a property for years are all of a sudden now being asked to pay a nominal fee. And it's that lack of understanding. That's funny. Well, while you were opening the podcast, I was just reviewing I printed off the Farm Production Expenditures Report from the USDA through July of 2020, which was just put out last year. In Indiana, and I know you guys both own farms in Ohio, in Indiana, average farm in 2020 paid $6,500 in taxes only, around $7,000-ish in interest only. So, the insurance is another cost. I don't know what it would be depending on what kind of value your land has, but those costs add up to landowners.
Yep.
And when you ask a landowner, can I access your property to hunt, whether it's free or leasing or not, you have to empathize with them that you have to take care of what they're concerned with. And the number one thing, it's not revenue, it's liability.
Yep.
Am I going to lose my farm
if
I let hunters come out on this property? And once you understand it, it actually is pretty easy. I mean, that's what we do.
Yep. And I think Jared said it, first, one of the number one things that we hear when we go door knocking and asking for permission is usually not a no because they don't want you to hunt. It's a no because of fear of liability.
Right. Absolutely. And it's, the statistics will bear out that hunting is a safer sport than football or, anything else. But just the idea that strangers that they don't know are going to be on their property with weapons is just, there's our inherent dangers in letting people on your property. I mean, that's why we have homeowners insurance. There's inherent dangers on having somebody come on my porch, my home.
Yep.
So that's, once that liability is addressed, I've seen, and I've talked to enough hunters that say the curtain kind of comes down on so we can get past the liability. Now let's start working on other things. And once you get past that barrier, it's infinitely easier to get permission.
Sorry. Wrong pipe. Yeah, wrong pipe. So, Sean, I think one thing that's kind of interesting about the American Hunting Lease Association, if I can talk, is that you guys provide tools to, let's say, prospective hunters to engage with landowners.
It's exactly what we do. Now, the genesis of all this started out as hunting leases and leasing, but we've really evolved into so much more than that. We are all about access now. We want hunters to have access because I believe, and I know we as a company here believe, access is the key to growing this sport in the future, improving the experience. Public ground is fine. I've got scars on my knuckles from hunting and hanging. I call it hiking and hunting and hanging and hauling because I had to hike in, I had to hang
the 4 H's.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I hunted, and then if I killed something, I had to haul it out. So, and I mean, that's where I cut my teeth. I still hunt on public ground occasionally, but I understand the older you get, the more you want the experience to be kind of focused on you alone.
Sure.
And I understand that. Now I have a grandson. I've got one on the way. I have a lease now that's all mine. It's the first time I've ever leased a place by myself. And I bit the bullet and I was like, I'm taking this for myself. I'll call the shots, I'll hang the stands, and I'll decide, when we go hunt. So, but to get back to your point, Jeremy, is we provide the tools for when you're knocking on doors.
Mm-hmm.
And I have something to say about that too. But when you finally get the meeting, you get a landowner to agree to talk to you. It's no longer enough to offer them to help bale hay.
Yeah.
That's nice. And you can still do that, by the way. If you do lease a property, it's okay to still create a relationship with your landowner where, hey, if you've got some wood that needs chopped or stacked or a fence that needs mended, I can take care of that for you too, because not only do you want to lease this property, but you want to lease it again next year and the year after that.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to do that is to build a relationship. But we want to put in your hands, when you do get this meeting, two things. One is a liability policy, or at least the idea, the notion, and the brochure that, hey, listen, landowner, I want to take care of your concerns. I understand the liability concern, and I want to address it with this liability policy. It's $235. That covers up to 500 acres. It's in the grand scheme of things, it's not much, especially when you split it several different ways with you and your buddies. And a contract, a lease, an actual hunting lease.
Right.
So we have the industry standard. So there's nothing that's left out of it. And then there's a customizable area that you can also put any, I tell landowners all the time, you lease an access. You're not even leasing your land. You're leasing the access to your property.
Mm-hmm.
You call the shots. You want ATVs used? Tell them they can use they can use them respectfully to retrieve game, that kind of stuff. You don't want them to camp? Tell them they can't camp. Tell them they can camp, but no campfires. The landowner can still make all the rules. And when a hunter goes to them and says, I just want access, I'll play by your rules, and you start to kind of tear down those barriers, you're going to get access sooner or later. Now, I'm not saying you're going to do it on the first landowner you talk to, but sooner or later, you're going to get access to a property, to a farm that you want to hunt.
Yeah. And I think what's really cool about that is the fact is you are building a relationship and a business relationship really with that landowner directly. And a lot of people listening to this are all, on the verge or have just bought land or are thinking about buying land. And, maybe they've had good experiences with real estate agents locally. Maybe they've had bad experiences. The fact is there's a chance of you acquiring a piece of ground prior to hitting the market. And the only way you're going to do that is by building some sort of a repertoire and relationship with a direct landowner prior to that happening. And this is setting you up for that. I mean, the fact that you're giving them the tools to form a secure relationship that not only protects them, but protects the landowner to start forming that relationship down the road. To me, that's step one in understanding that there's a possible further transaction that can happen down the road here.
Well, the thing I've learned is that all landowners kind of run in groups.
Mm-hmm.
All the landowners in an area know one another.
Yep.
So you're exactly right. Once you have a rapport with a landowner and over 4 or 5 years, he's met your kids or your hunting buddies, and you've met him and his family. And then sooner or later, he is going to, or she is going to say, you know what, I think we're going to sell our property. Or what happens frequently, sadly, is the landowner will pass away and the kids might live out of state.
Yep.
And they say, you know what, we've got that 150 acres in Indiana and we really don't want it. We'd like to sell it, but you guys have been there for 4 or 5 years. You know the farm. We'd like to give you first shot at it. That happens frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And you're exactly right. The thing is, I think about leasing or just getting access also is when you have exclusive access to a property and you work on it for 4 or 5 years, you really know if you want to own your own property.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into that. I am not a huge land manager. I frost seeded some clover last weekend. I'm going to remove some limbs. I'll clear some areas. And that's really about all I want to do. I got other things to do. There are people in this office that talk all day long about switchgrass and what kind of trees to plant and the habitat. And I can listen to it all day. But when it comes time to do it, I'm going to find some sheds or I want to just hang a tree stand. I want to sit there. It's like being a bow hunter. People are like, oh, you're an archer? No, I'm a bow hunter. Mm-hmm. I have no idea about FOC or how fast my arrows are traveling. No clue. I know that my arrows are faster than the deer typically if I'm on target, but so there's a difference. And it's kind of the same way that When you get exclusive access to a property, you'll know pretty quick if you want to own your own property, in particular, if you want to own that property.
Yeah. And I think that's a really cool point because, you know, especially in today's market, Jared and I just got done talking to somebody about timber and like trying to understand the value of timber when you're approaching a new piece of ground. You know, you don't have enough time to get a consulting forester in there to give you the valuation of what that timber is. The market's so hot that if you look at it and you pass it up tomorrow, there's an offer on it, you know? And so that's kind of the cool thing with this opportunity is if you can build an engaging relationship out of the gate with someone and hunt that property and understand it and be like, man, you know, either it's already there or it's got the potential to go there, you know that it's something that you potentially want to invest. It's truly the try before you buy opportunity.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, the landowners all know each other. So even if your landowner is not ready to sell or wants to sell over a couple of years, you're going to be the first person to hear about, hey, a buddy of mine I was talking to, over coffee the other day, he says he's going to put up his 80 acres. It's just about 5 minutes from here. Told him you might be interested. Those are the connections and the relationships that matter if you want to own your own farm.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Sean, when we start thinking about just whether it's a lease and or land that somebody owns, I mean, what are the major liabilities that we need to be aware of, you know, on a piece of property?
As a landowner?
Yes.
As a landowner, I think there's natural dangers or liabilities that you need to address. And I tell all my landowners that call, you need to either walk your property with someone if it's possible, or have somebody walk it on your behalf. I can't tell you the amount of old abandoned cisterns or wells that I've come on just walking around in the woods. They're 9-10 foot drops. And if you're bebopping along with a tree stand on your back one day in the morning before light, you step in a well like that, you're going to break some limbs. Those are the kind of, I think, those trip hazards, those, we don't get claims that are just catastrophic, I guess, right?
Yep.
We don't get those. We get people being injured. ATVs, you've got a mark on your map. What's safe? Where can you travel on an ATV? Where can you not go on an ATV? This all needs to be in the hunting lease agreement, in my opinion. Ponds, of course, if you've got kids out there, you just have to be aware enough to go out, make a map of your property, mark the hazards, and then review all those hazards with your guests or your leasees. And, other than that, there's not a ton of liability. And this liability, by the way, the coverage we provide is two ways. I probably have more hunters damaged a landowner claims than the other way around. Irrigation systems tend to get shot accidentally. I've had one livestock accidentally shot. I think it was from a neighbor that wandered onto a property. And they think it's a deer. Somebody thought, misrepresented or ID'd it. So those kind of things, it's two-way coverage. Let me tell you what's not a claim. Fell out of my tree stand. That's probably the one we get the most. Is I fell out of my tree stand, I broke my ankle, I want to file a claim. Happy to file the claim because we don't make that decision, obviously. We have independent adjusters that do that. But my first question to them is, who hung your stand? Well, I did. Okay, so whose fault is it? Well, mine, but I still want to file a claim. And the liability insurance never pays you. Right. Liability is to protect you. Right. So now if you told me, well, a landowner hung that stand, he told me I should go sit in it. And about the time I was on the 8th step, it just collapsed and I broke both my legs. You have a valid claim. That's very reasonable. So that's what, the insurance covers. It protects hunters and landowners both, not just from injury, but damage to the other personal property. Prep is another good one. We were out weed eating. We were out, just cutting weeds and tall grass. And my buddy accidentally cut my leg with the weed eater. And so, I like to file a claim. There is member to member coverage, even against, each other. So it's a comprehensive package that, it takes care of everyone's liability.
How about on the food plot side? One of the things when I bought my property that the insurance people that I was working with brought up was if I was going to cash rent or if anybody was going to farm the property, and said, well, no, it's just me planting food plots. And they made that seem like the the farming side was a very big issue if it ever came up, because I would assume of use of tractor and tractor accidents and things like that.
Well, if you're leasing farming rights or something like that, it is a completely different game. And that's why it's really important on our contract and any contract that you discern between leasing the rights to access and then leasing the land.
Gotcha.
Now, leasing the land throws you into there's a tenancy laws, and typically you have to be a real estate agent to lease land like that. So it's not just the liability, it's also the legality of leasing for farming rights or farming the land, as opposed to just the rights. And we're crystal clear. This is just access. Is all you're leasing.
I was going to say, I think that's a really cool point, because how many times, and I myself am guilty of it, say like, yeah, I'm leasing this piece of ground. I'm not. I'm leasing the rights to hunt that piece of ground. I'm not leasing that piece of ground. But it's just the way that we talk and the way that we observe things. But, I would think that a bunch of people listening to this truly think like, well, no, I pay that guy to lease that ground. You don't. You lease the rights to hunt that area.
I think speaking technically too, like I think a lot of people refer to their hunters as leasers.
Yes.
And they're leasees, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Technically.
Leasees.
The leaseor is the landowner.
The landowner.
Yeah. I don't know anybody that says that correctly.
Yes. Correct. Yeah. And it seems like a really big thing, because I know that as a person who leases the hunting rights, right? Jared, you and I have leased plenty of land together where we could go in and plant food plots if we wanted to. We have that permission from the landowner. Yeah. How does something like that get covered?
Planting the food plots?
Yeah.
That's completely covered under the in a hunting lease liability. That's not a problem.
Gotcha.
You can have any liability from the use of tractors or farm implementations or mobile equipment is completely covered.
Gotcha.
Which includes food plots. So yeah, that's not excluded. The liability is called the commercial general liability policy. It's the same policy pretty much all around the country. It's just tailored by exclusions and by certain endorsements. So when I started doing this, when I learned about how it all worked, it's kind of like the ragu. Remember the old commercial for ragu spaghetti sauce?
Mm-hmm.
It's in there. Yeah, it's in there. The garlic, it's in there. The tomatoes are in there. The liability coverage in this country is if it's not excluded by the policy, it's covered. If it doesn't expressly say we don't cover that, then it is covered. It's kind of strange, but that's their rules.
Oh, that's good.
I think that's the way to do it.
Sean, you mentioned it was $235. I assume is that annually? And I guess that's annually. And is that for a single, how is that tied to like a landowner or a hunter? Does that rope in as many or as few hunters and or landowners as I want it to?
That's such a good question. So for $235, and again, that's up to 499 acres. And then we have, there's a pricing structure, but you have to have a hunting lease agreement on file. You don't have to give it to us, but if you have a claim, the first thing the adjuster is going to ask for is, I need to see your hunting lease.
So there needs to be a physical lease agreement. This can't take place only under permission.
Correct. No, for a hunting lease, you have to have a written lease agreement in place.
Interesting.
And I'll be honest with you, Jared, it could be written on the back of a napkin.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be anything, overly legal, but you do have to have a written agreement. Every hunter that is listed on that hunting lease is covered.
Could it, in theory, Sean, I'm just going to ask as you're going through here, could it essentially be written permission? What would constitute a lease? Does there need to be, monies exchanged or?
For hunting lease insurance, there needs to be some compensation. It could be a nickel.
Okay.
Got it.
And, before we had vacant land, it could be for anything, any kind of compensation, but everybody that's listed on the lease is fully covered. And so is the landowner for the property that's listed on the lease agreement. Mm-hmm. And to answer your other question, you could put 7 landowners for no additional charge. And I'm going to be kind of salesy right here. All the other competitors that we have, that are about 3 of them, they'll charge you a landowner fee.
Yep.
Some of them are up to $57. For every landowner you have, they're going to add another $57. We started this out of a sincere desire to have a positive effect on access and hunting. The landowners are key. The landowners hold the key, figuratively and literally.
He who holds the supply. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we understand how important they are. It's not optional for you to include your landowner. The only reason you're buying this coverage is because your landowner told you you had to, or you agreed to. So we will add 7 landowners at no charge because we understand how important they are, their role in this whole thing is. So we're not going to charge you. We'll never charge you to add a landowner. And you can have, like I said, up to 7 on one policy. So we get so many calls all the time, like, hey, I picked up another 150 acres. It's owned by somebody else. Do I need another policy? No. Where is it? We'll roll it into the policy you have, no charge. Thanks for everything, and you're on down the road.
Anywhere in the country, Sean? Anywhere in the
What's
country?
that?
Anywhere in the country?
Anywhere in the country.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, we have policies in all 50 states now. So it's, and that's just something we really tried to disrupt this industry by replacing the print of the application and download it and fill it out and mail it in with a check. Ours is completely digital. You're welcome to call in if you like. We can take care of you that way. But overall, it's anywhere in the country, and it's a 10-minute process. So it's really, really simple.
And so 7 landowners is the limit. How about on the hunter side? How many hunters can I have on a policy?
No limit.
No limit.
However many you can put on that. We've got hunt clubs in Georgia and Alabama have 200 members, and they lease 7,000-8,000 acres. And that's the difference. If you want to talk about the difference between leasing and in the Midwest and the East compared to the South, you guys probably know the South is where it started.
Oh yeah.
And those hunt clubs have been around for a century.
Yep.
And they are going to hunt. Doesn't matter what the economy's like. It doesn't matter. They're hunting every year. They're going to pay their fees. They're going to renew their insurance. And that's just the way it is. And I've talked to you guys in the South who say, and I'll tell them, guys in the Midwest have a little pushback sometimes on leasing. What do you mean? How the hell do they hunt if they're not leasing?
Right.
Well, it's a little different. It's been a different ballpark, a different ballgame.
I was going to ask about amounts of coverage. Like it sounds like it's a fixed rate for the policy. So like, what is the amount of coverage?
So it's $1 million per occurrence. So, and then $2 million aggregate. So if you have one incident, you have up to a $1 million coverage protection as the landowner or the hunters. And then you can have up to $2 million per policy. Now, this policy also has a duty to defend. So if you get sued by anybody, they have this policy has the duty to defend you in court. And then any of those costs do not go towards the million or the 2 million. That's above and beyond.
Got it.
But we've recently, over the last 2 years, have had landowners requiring more coverage. They want 2 million per occurrence. So about this time last year, we introduced another policy. It's still hunting lease policy, but it is a 2 million per occurrence, $2 million aggregate. Basically the same policy. You can get all your money on one occurrence, and it's been pretty popular, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a lot of people wanting, for the nominal amount that they would pay per year, to have that extra cushion, right? And it's just it's a mental thing, right? Just so that mental protection's there from that 2 million on an occurrence.
Well, it's a valuable asset to protect. I mean, if you own 500 acres with a home and all these, livestock on it, there's a lot to risk there.
Well, and I think one thing that's kind of interesting that, maybe even the three of us don't even look at that often, but it's been kind of just floating in the back of my head is the fact that, as like I'm kind of on that pathway now of investing into more properties. I'd rather own land and own a property and a tangible piece and, still have some paper funds, but like this is where I want to invest. Ultimately, when we talk about it all the time, you can only hunt so many pieces of ground, right? Eventually, you're just stretched too thin that you can't be efficient on it. For the rate that most property, especially good deer property, is leasing out anymore, hell, you may not want to sell that property this year. You can't hunt it. Why wouldn't you lease it at $30 an acre to someone and have this, need this coverage to protect you on it? You could make half of your yearly mortgage out of just a hunting lease anymore on some of these places. And I think that's something that people don't think about, especially if you're an absentee landowner and owning out of state. If you're in Iowa or Kansas or something where it's not a guaranteed draw anymore and you own land, you may be needing something like this so that the years you don't draw up, you can at least lease it out and make a ton of money back because, as you said, Sean, you've got all these hard costs and taxes and interest and everything else that you're going to be paying out of pocket.
I think guides and outfitters do that quite a bit too. They might have 15 or 20 leases in an area and kind of rotate them through. We're not going to hunt that this year, or we can't get to that one this year for whatever reason. And then they can recoup their leasing costs by leasing it out. So their landowners do the same thing. We're seeing more and more absentee landowners. you guys know the real estate market last year went berserk.
Yep.
I actually lost both my leases last year, one in Indiana, one in Kentucky, because the property sold.
Yep.
And I had a landowner tell me probably 5 years ago when I leased this place in Kentucky, he said, I'll never sell this place. This is where me and my wife and my family are going to retire. And he was dead set on it until he could double his money in about a 5-year investment.
Wow.
And he called me and goes, I'm so sorry, but I have to sell this, you know?
Crazy.
So
You do. Yeah, you have to.
That's nuts, man. I mean, that is the realization of kind of where we're at. And you talk about the access and the opportunities and stuff. And because that market is so crazy, you know, if you're in an area, like let's say here's your core area, my house, everywhere that I want to hunt's within 40 minutes of my house, right? You're going to start to know those people and know those landowners more. You know, ultimately, if you're waiting for a property to come on the market, there's going to be very few that hit the market. And when they do, they're going to go fast. You're better off like trying to lay this foundation of early relationships and connections just so that you have a foot in the door, because if that property does go to market or it's intending to, you potentially can intercept it before it does.
And ultimately, I think it's important to say the landowner, for their own best interest, it would still be wise to take that to market. I mean, to realize its true market value.
Yep.
You know, whether that's whether you're going to actually list
Sure.
it or it's going to go to auction.
Yeah.
You know, and you can put something in there about this landowner being interested in it, but as a landowner, you owe it to yourself to have that property's true market value realized, and you're not going to get that from a direct sale to a neighbor.
But I think where you get the opportunity from a leasing side is that, and I've done this with several places. In fact, my Kentucky place is one, is where I have an option of a first right of refusal to buy.
100%.
As the leasee,
You got it.
right,
Yeah.
of the property, I have first right of refusal to buy. Now, they may say, yeah, I want $1 million for it. And I'm like, well, good luck. I can't 100%. Do it.
I think that's the important distinction, is that, you know, even with that relationship, you know, it's a business transaction. The landowner at the end of the day owes it to themselves and to their property to take that property to market. And I think it's an awesome thing if they can give first right of refusal to somebody who's a current leaser, you know, that they have a relationship with. Leasee. I just see what I just did there.
But you have to understand that if you've leased this place for 5 years, you have invested 5 years of money into that place, and you don't have any equity to show for it.
Oh, you're exactly right. I mean, there's all kind of pluses to leasing.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, but yeah, you're right. When they pull out and they say, "Hey, you're done. Come get your stands." It was difficult for me to go. In fact, I had a big blind up on a tower that at the time that it was sold was in the middle of a cornfield with 10-foot corn all around it. I couldn't get it out. Yeah. So, you know, those kind of things happen. But here's the opportunity that I think hunters are going to have in the future because of this. From all the reading that I've done, a lot of the money came from the coasts, East and the West Coast in particular, to buy this land in the Midwest because COVID or whatever it was. They're like, we got to get a place where we can go, you know, relax and retire. COVID's gone. These are absentee landowners now, by and large. There's plenty of them. Not everybody, but there's plenty of them. And in the next 3 to 5 years, they're either going to realize that, hey, we never did go to that place in Kentucky we bought. You know, let's sell it. Yep. Or now's really the time to start reaching out to these folks and to get in front of them before that happens by what you're saying, by maybe offering to lease. And the way to do that, and I've kind of come full circle on this. For years, I was asked, how can I get permission? What can I say when I knock on the door? I am officially saying, stop knocking on doors. Just stop. When was the last time either one of you had somebody knock on your door in an evening, unannounced and uninvited? And your reaction is anything but, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
That's where we are now.
Yeah.
You know, we can debate it, whatever, whether it's good. That's where we are. So when you're knocking on doors, the only people that knock on your door unannounced and uninvited want something from you.
Yeah. Or Jehovah's Witness.
But you know, they're going to come to the door if they're home, even if they answer it, and they're just already put off. So you can use now, and I know people are doing this. In fact, a friend of mine just bought 15 acres all woods to build a house on this exact way. Get on Hunt Stand, get on Onyx, get on the local GIS site. Look in the area that you want to hunt, and you can identify parcels of land by aerial that you think would look like you could hunt them. And then click on it. There is the landowner information, all of their mailing information, not the phone number typically. You then go to a site like Vistaprint and you create a postcard with a picture of yourself and who you are and what it is that you're looking for, and that you would love to meet them for coffee or lunch somewhere local, and we can have this conversation. You can do that to 100 to 200 times. You will send these out. You'll be in this less than $100. Less than $100. You can make 200 contacts. You get 8 that say, yeah, I'd like to talk to you. And then 3 that say, let's work something out. Now you're choosing between 3 farms that you wanted to hunt. And to your point, if they're going to resell these, and the real estate industry says they're going to in the next 5 years, you're already a step ahead. Or maybe they, like you said, they owe it to themselves as business folks to get a return on their investment. That postcard might lay there for 6 months. They answer the door enough times, and they're like, you know what? We had a postcard from a guy not long ago. Let's call him back. And it's just a way to get your name and everything out there and actually start leasing or purchasing the land.
I'll challenge you on that just for fun.
Go for it.
Sean, I think I appreciate your perspective, obviously. I think that like devil's advocate, as a landowner,
you're not necessarily a knocker though. You're a caller. You phone call.
If I can, I knock.
Wait.
If it's close, I knock. If it's Utah, I call.
Or Dakotas, we call.
Or the Dakotas, I call. So, and I think that, and I say this as a hunter and as a landowner, like some of the best relationships that I have built have been from those, potentially awkward, conversations of, hey, I'm on your door at 6 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. Frankly, most of the time it's on a whim. I'll get this, surge of, I'm like, I'm going to ask him. I'm going to go to the door, and we talked to a guy this morning that, was somewhat come from one of those relationships. I feel like if you could prove it to me, I would obviously believe you. I would need to see some evidence, but I've never heard of anybody getting permission from sending a postcard and a landowner being like, oh, this guy wants to hunt. He sent me a letter, maybe. So maybe there's our middle ground. If it's a personal letter, obviously we've had some success with that. Is that maybe more what you meant?
Yeah, my friend that bought 15 acres sent letters. So it could be postcard, be letter. I guess what I was trying to display was just that you can do a great number
for sure.
Contacts for little time, little money. But letters even better. Maybe it's a postcard that you write on it.
That makes sense.
Gotcha.
It's just in that post, all I'm trying to do with that is to initiate that first call. I'll still come knock on your door, but I want you to be expecting me. I want you to have invited me. So now it's the roles have changed. The dynamics are completely different.
I'm completely with you, Sean. I think like part of my comment there is like I just hate to see, even though the world is going that way, it's like, man, what a shame that you can't go and knock on somebody's door and introduce yourself as, hey, I'm your neighbor. I'm so-and-so. I don't know if you guys have people bow hunting or not, but because I've had a lot of success with that. I've got a lot of good relationships from that. I hate to see it die off completely.
The unfortunate thing is, and it not the exact same, but kind of the same, is like in some places you don't want to go knock at, and they don't want you to be there. I'll give you a good example. So I was in Kentucky this weekend. I'm literally
nowhere in Kentucky, obviously.
I'm on my edge of on my side of the property, right? My neighbor's got property next to me. But I'm clearly on my side, and with the kids too. And like all of a sudden, like 6 rounds of 22s up into the trees.
You think that guy's gonna call you because you sent him a postcard?
Well, he got a visit. He got a visit for me, whether he liked it or not. After that, because he was like, "Well, I thought you were trespassing on my property," and I'm like,
"So you shot at me?"
Yeah, he shot at me.
Wow,
6 of them.
Unbelievable.
And it's like, and he was worked up by the time that I got to him because he realized what he did and he realized where we were. And it's because he had shit stolen and whatever else. But I mean, the fact is in most cases you're approaching a house in a rural area, and you just don't know. I mean,
there's no doubt. There's obviously, Sean.
You haven't lived until the gun's been drawn on you.
I'm just challenging you for fun.
Happen.
There are some big advantages, I think, to reaching out prior to be shown up.
We had some success in South Dakota just because we would catch farmers coming out from working cattle and stuff, and we would stop them, just briefly on the...
Yeah. Dude, I spent a lot of time making phone calls prior. And, dude, honestly, it saved us because I knew some people.
Sure.
I called everybody in North Dakota.
We know this guy. This guy knows this guy.
We got a flat tire. Do you know a guy? Hey, can we access this piece? And yes, it worked out.
I think what is interesting about the way that land ownership is going and the way that some of the mindset is from these absentee landowners for sure. Kentucky's an interesting one because even where I'm at, there's been a mad rush of people from California buying land. And it's probably because, they're buying little junky houses for $1 million and they can get land at $1,500 an acre where I'm at still. And they're like, this is crazy. Like, I can't believe we can buy all this land for, dirt cheap. But I think to your point, Sean, like, that fad is going to fade here really quick because they're going to realize it's not feasible to still live in California and also have this property in Kentucky. So if you can get out ahead of them, and engage with them and say, hey, listen, I know while you're here, you still have to pay property taxes and you still have expenses and interest and stuff. Like, why don't you lease it to me? And if you guys are coming out and you're going to hike the property, just let me know. I really just want to deer hunt it. I don't care about anything else. I think that puts you in a position because eventually that person is going to sell. They're not going to, especially I know where most of these people are buying it. It's 100% sight unseen because had they gone there and realized the other structures that they were buying and they're coming from San Diego or whatever, they would have never bought in that area. But and it doesn't bother me because like, those are my people. I'm like, hey, I don't care.
I think they're probably more apt to lease to you or give you permission, one or the other.
Yeah.
If they're absentee landowners and knocking on doors, it is tradition. And I get it. And if you're successful at it, by all means, keep doing it. But you also have to have a person living on the farm you want to hunt to do that. And most of the time, I always know a good hunting farm when I turn down a gravel road. The lease I have in Southern Indiana, as soon as I turn onto this gravel road, I'm just grinning from ear to ear. I'm like, okay, this is the shit.
Yeah,
I know this is going to be good, but there are no homes back there. But I think they're more apt to lease it to you or give you permission once you start talking about not just the revenue, because before they realize they're paying all this money and they're wasting their money, they're going to say, how can I recoup some of this money and make a little bit back? But when you start talking about trespassers, if you guys are absentee landowners and you're never out there, I can tell you, I drive by there all the time. There's trash. There's people out there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Leasing it helps with that tremendously. I've talked to dozens of landowners who say the same thing. I thought the money was nice. I had no idea that the trespassing would stop when the same 3 or 4 trucks were parked there all the time and they posted it and they know that there's trail cameras out there. Or the other thing is, hey, I know you've given permission to 20 people to hunt back in that area. And typically the landowner is just looking for a way out of that problem. Yeah, I've said yes to so many people now, I've lost control.
Yep.
Well, I can give you control back. Let me give you a couple $1,000s between me and my buddies, and we'll tell those 20 people for you that, sorry, they can no longer hunt there. We'll take care of that for you. So there's benefits to allowing people to access your farm other than revenue.
Agree.
That trail camera comment is an interesting one. I don't have the stats obviously in front of us, but I would venture to bet that trespassing is significantly down since the invention of cellular trail cameras.
100%.
I also wanted
if they're aware of that technology existing.
Well, yeah, I think people are more and more.
Let me kind of jump in real quick. About 6 weeks ago, we sell no trespassing signs.
Yep.
We designed new ones, and at the bottom of them, it says cellular cameras in use.
There you go.
And I was just talking to my admin earlier yesterday, and she said, man, these signs are flying.
Yep.
Like, really? Like, yep, because that's even if they're not in use.
Yeah.
If you're a trespasser,
it doesn't matter. You see
a lazy slob.
Yeah.
I don't need to mess with that. My picture is going to be sent to the landowner before I even saw the camera.
The guy who shot at me, coincidentally, the first thing he said, he's like, well, you've never seen me on your property, have you? And I was like, no. He's like, because I know you got cellular cameras over there.
Exactly.
Good. Genius.
So he shot at me, but, still.
I think it's interesting. I'll change the subject here a little bit. There's like this new emerging market, and I want to be careful to not ever, say that hunters and landowners, like so often in these conversations, we talk about them like different people, they're different demographics of people. But I think per what we're seeing in the real estate space, like a lot of hunters are becoming landowners either for the first time or they're expanding, the profile of properties that they own and stuff. And as the demand for hunting in certain states has grown, it seems like there's an emerging market for non-resident hunting landowners that would benefit from leasing their properties. Let's use Iowa as an example, or Kansas as the demand continues to grow. That even though I own this property and I enjoy the benefits of land ownership, I can't legally go out and hunt it every year. And so I may want to have people hunting it or overseeing it.
Yes.
And that's going to require, obviously back to an insurance policy here, but talking about benefits of leasing, I think that's an emerging market that's important that probably a lot of people don't consider.
Well, and I think along with that, unlike selling a property, is I can pick and choose who leases my property. If I interview you and you seem like a dirtbag, sorry, I'm not leasing it to you.
Exactly.
On the sell side, I can't because of Fair Housing Act. I can't say I'm not going to sell it to this person.
Per what Sean is saying,
do that.
Maybe answer this question for us. And here's a complex one. So I'm a hunter, landowner. I own property in Iowa. I wish. And I can't hunt for the next 4 or 5 years. That's obviously, well, I don't think that's a reason for me to sell this property. It's an awesome property. It's appraising, but I can't hunt it. And so I want people to go out. Can I set some kind of standard for the way that property is hunted all the way down to an age or an antler qualification, for the people that I let hunt?
Sure. You absolutely, as a landowner, you call all the shots. Now, what they're, harvesting, I don't know how you would enforce it unless you require them to take pictures.
It's only as good as you can enforce it.
1 year at a time.
Yeah.
That's how.
Yeah. I mean,
you can say, You can say bow only. You can say, no turkey hunting because I've got a nephew that he is going to go out there and turkey hunt, so you can't have it for turkey season. You can set all the parameters.
So what a huge advantage to hunters who are landowners who can't hunt the properties that they own every year. Not only can you offer insurance, but you can lease these to hunters that have the same standards or are following the standards that you've set. And so now, instead of, having no trail camera information, no shed information, no hunting information off of, that's not going to reduce the quality of this property by the time you get to come around and hunt it again. You ultimately have all that control, and you have the coverage now to do it.
Well, I mean, we've had a lot of people write in who are on the verge of kind of doing what we want to do here, which is I want to own a bunch of properties, and some of them will be in this state, some will be in this state. At any given time, I'd like to hunt them, but at some point, you're not going to be able to hunt all these properties. And I think that, and it's kind of just because it's counterintuitive, they're like, well, how else can I make money on this property? Lease it out for hunting is how you can make it, and just put the right qualifications in place to where you have, set up the policies as best as possible, and you've vetted the people that, have basically asked to lease the property. You charge a fair amount, and yes, you don't get to hunt that this year. You still can manage it, which is great. You can still plant food plots for these people, but ultimately you're going to collect the money from the hunting lease that year. And hell, man, that might be half of your mortgage for the next year, going into that property again. And if you weren't ready to sell it yet, why not? Otherwise, it's just sitting there not making any money, and you're not hunting it either.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't even bring up the obvious advantages of controlling the herd.
Exactly.
There's deers you want killed. There's the
Great
trespassing
point,
problem.
Great point.
So, I mean, there's a ton of advantages to leasing your property that aren't just revenue. And that's why we try and tell, we want all landowners to understand that. It's because again, it just goes back to having a genuine desire to have a positive effect on hunting, and whether leasing is for you or not, I don't know, but I'm telling you, I do think it's for landowners. And back to kind of the landowner setting the parameters, there is no shortage of hunters that'll lease your property.
No doubt.
You can set some crazy parameters, I'm guessing, especially in Iowa. A guy gets drawn kind of a last minute, he goes out there, he can't find a place. You go, hey, I can lease it to you just for this 2 weeks. Now that affects the value of the lease, obviously. Well, but you can set all the rules, and you will find somebody to pay you to lease it.
I mean, you see it though. Like I see plenty of places in Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky where that landowner will typically shoot their one buck in bow season, and because nobody else is there hunting it, they'll lease out gun season for $5,000, and guys will take it.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah. Well, and a lot of hunters, myself included, if I wasn't like pursuing land ownership, I would be pissed about that. I'd be like, oh, well, all these guys are leasing property for so much money. But if, ultimately the rate of that lease gets to a point where I'm like, well, man, why don't I just consider a down payment on, purchasing a ground? I think that's what kind of keeps that lease price in check, or it keeps the market in check.
No, again, there are benefits. We've talked about this in the past. Like I can take a lease and I can write it off as a business expense, right?
For sure.
I have to take depreciation on a piece of land.
100%. There are advantages to
and
leasing.
if it doesn't have structures on it, I'm not getting any depreciation on it, right? So like there are definitely advantages to lease opportunities on that to look at. But I think when you start to think about it as a landowner, like, yes, if you have one property and you bought the property, which is most of us, we buy one property, that is our property. We're not going to lease it out. But if you're looking at it as an investment strategy, and I think we even talked with Dan Perez about this, Dan was talking about different things with using self-directed IRAs and stuff. And I was like, well, Dan, one of the things you could do is you could lease that out for hunting. And it didn't even cross his mind because he's thinking every property I buy, I want to hunt.
Yeah.
That's not really the case.
Well, that's
some point.
That's like the barrier that I'm trying to break down with my comment there. So often we think of landowners and hunters as different people with different interests. And like, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think more and more, and especially as we move forward, you're going to start to see a lot of the same people. And so leasing is definitely an important tool in the tool bag. The most extreme version is sell it, or buy another one. But
the way that land's appreciating, do you want to sell it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to continue to appreciate in value. Like if there's anything, you've bought another piece and you can't hunt this one, you lease it out a year and you start. I mean, the whole goal of land ownership is also to figure out, income producing options with that property.
Leasing certainly is one.
Yeah. I mean, if in my area, and Sean, yours might be different in some of the Indiana places, but like in my area of Kentucky or even Ohio, like cash rent is junk, right? Even if I had
$75 an acre.
Yeah, even if I had a decent chunk of tillable, it's like 50.
Yeah.
Whereas I could make 4 times that, on the total acreage by leasing it out for hunting. Because I only have this much tillable and I'm leasing out this much for hunting. If you can do both, yeah, that's great. That's a huge amount. But I mean, you have to get creative in that way.
Sean, you're with on what he's saying about the the self-directed IRA. So there's going to be chunks of your land that you purchase that you're not able to use. Like if I buy it with that, I can't hunt it. And so Jeremy's saying, the conversation we had with Dan is consider leasing it. And especially if you can control the rights to that lease, that's basically like saying, who do you want your neighbors to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a big one when you talk about big tillable ground chunks. Like, I've got guys that have basically looked at, they're like, well, what would I do with it? And I was like, I would lease that cornfield out to goose hunters because I'm not going to sit in the middle of the cornfield necessarily and deer hunt. I may be on the edge, which I can, but you could lease that out to goose hunters which
obviously it's not always a fit. So people are listening, I'm hunting the edge of the field.
Sure.
But it's a tool in the tool bag. There are specific scenarios where it will work for you.
Winky uses it a lot, it sounds like.
Yeah, dude.
And so I think that you have to look at the creativity, but an overall arching thing that I've always not even paid attention to and now have is the liability aspect of it. Because again, if I'm leasing out that little piece of it, now that little piece, that little tract has to have a hunting lease insurance policy on it to be able to protect those people that are hunting it as me, the landowner, basically.
Oh, you're 100% right. And when you guys talk about leasing leading to land ownership, not always the case. I don't really know your guys' background. I was born and raised in the city of Indianapolis. I didn't hunt till I was 26 or 7. I've had no aspirations as an Indianapolis fireman. I didn't make great money until, I still don't make great money, but I don't have any aspirations of owning land. And I hear, I've heard the Drurys or Winky or some of those guys say, start with just buying 10 acres or 30 acres. And I'm 57. I don't have 20 years to build up to the amount of land that I think I would want to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And so leasing for me is always going to be preferred, Not that I couldn't buy some land, but if it's 50 acres or 70 acres, that's beautiful. Guys in this office own just that amount and they love it. Mm-hmm. For me, I want 150 to 200 acres that I can drive 2 hours to away from my home and go down there and spend the weekend.
Yeah.
And that's always going to be such a viable, when you look at the finances of it, to me, that's what I'll probably always do.
Yep. I think what will be interesting to your point, Jared, and just kind of looking at it now is, and Sean, I don't know, you probably know the demographic more. Most of the landowners who are covered in that insurance policy, I would assume, are not hunters, right? They have people that are leasing the hunting rights on that property to hunt.
overwhelming majority. And,
Yep.
It's odd. 80% of the purchasers, the people who call us, are hunters.
Yep.
So the landowner just says, you got to provide this kind of insurance. And so the hunters look at it, or they look for it and they find it and then they purchase it. The vacant land coverage, though, is mostly hunters, and it's landowners they call. I bought 100 acres. I bought 150 acres. I'm going to hunt it with my neighbor or my buddy from work, and I need vacant land coverage because I'm not leasing it.
Yep.
So, they need the vacant land.
But somebody's going to. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
What's that?
So you, like, I am hunting it. It is my property, but I'm letting other people on it. I need that coverage.
Right. What an odd epiphany we had when we realized a couple of years ago, wow, most landowners don't lease their land.
Yeah.
You just get in that mindset that we're the Hunting Lease Association. So we're all about leasing. And they're like, there are 20-fold the landowners actually using their land and sharing access, but also need liability coverage.
Yeah.
Well, I think
so
Sean,
that's kind of changed the game for us.
Something that I had an epiphany last year too, and talking to a bunch of these North Dakota landowners, is that, and I don't know how far to the east that this would extend, but I'm going to say it's a majority of the Midwest, or anywhere that there's like pasture or farming ground, is it seems like for, historically, a lot of hunting access has come through crop leasing, basically, or pasture leasing. If I'm paying for the right to have my cows on a place, or I'm paying for the right to farm it kind of was unspoken that I'm also paying for the rights to hunt that piece of ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that. I'm probably more aware of the person who leased the farming rights now wants to lease the hunting rights to try and recoup some of the money that they paid for the right to farm the property.
Yep.
And by the way, just to be clear, we can't cover that. That's a sublease, and we don't.
Subleases. Yeah. So, I think that's an interesting aspect of it because, you're right in terms of how those kind of. Like I'm buying the bundle of rights here. Like if I'm farming this, then I'm having the chance to control or choose the deer that are harvested out of here.
Yeah. In fact, it may or may not be the case, but at one point in time, it's probably not this way anymore, but at one point in time, the majority of like deer lease holders, people that were leasing, were inadvertently just farmers, not necessarily hunters.
Sure.
They had the access to go and do it, but
well, I mean, when I grew up here in Western Pennsylvania, one of my buddies worked for one of the largest sweet corn farmers in the area. And basically anywhere that he was farming, we could hunt, and it was because like he basically, it was an ultimatum. He's like, listen, I'm either going to farm your ground and we're going to kill as many deer as we can because they're affecting my harvest, or I'm not farming your ground, because if you're going to have one guy come in and kill one doe, then they're going to mow down my sweet corn every year, and it's not worth me doing. And so he laid out the ultimatum, which was, if I'm farming your ground, we have the hunting rights so that we can harvest as many deer as possible.
Yeah.
And it makes sense in that way, and I'm sure most of the landowners didn't know, because 15, 20 years ago, people didn't exchange money to lease. You asked for permission, or you knew somebody and you got on, and that's how you hunted it. Now, I mean, this is a big business.
Yeah.
Hunting, the demand for, unpressured private land is through the roof, and whether that's because you're buying or because you're leasing, it's because, and again, it's not that we knock the public land side. It's just that you can't control your overall experience on public land because there's other people there that have their own mission in their head of what they're doing. It's just how it is.
I was watching the podcast you had with Jeff Sturgis, and he touched on the pressure in particular, in that he would rather have no habitat and no pressure as to great habitat and a bunch of pressure.
100%.
And you're exactly right. The control is what you're looking for. Some semblance of control. I can control who is on this 160 acres that I'm leasing for the most part when I'm there. And so I know who's been there. I know what stands have been hunted. I know when not to hunt, which is so important. It's more important than when to hunt. So that pressure and that control is what I believe as a hunter is my main benefit to leasing.
Yeah.
Or owning.
Yeah,
now,
sure.
Now, the interesting thing to the lease part is because you're only leasing the rights to hunting or access there are other activities that are going to happen on that property that are out of your control. Farmers doing this, landowners doing this, and that's just part of it. But that's where communication is so key. Like anybody that leases a piece of property and doesn't communicate with the landowner is missing out. Right, because if you can't communicate with that landowner just to get a repertoire with them and say, hey, usually I only hunt Fridays and Saturdays. That's all I have. Like, I'll be down there next weekend if the weather's good. They at least can anticipate you being
Easy
there.
example. I mean, cows, the way they're moving cows around. And it's like, man, if you have a relationship, you can say, hey, I'm coming out. It's my 1 week. Would you guys be willing to pull the cows out of there? Or, just tell us where they are, so we can
avoid them.
Make a strategy,
Yeah.
We talked earlier about a relationship. That's why you build a relationship.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because, hey, I gave a buddy of mine permission to go cut firewood this weekend. Okay, well, we were going to go hunt this weekend. The worst thing you want to do is get up in a tree stand and have some guy fire up a chainsaw
cutting your tree
100
down.
yards away.
Mm-hmm.
But the landowner has the right to do that. But that relationship you build early on, and you're exactly right, you got to call and email, talk to them, tell them what you're seeing. If they're out there farm, my God, they're the best source of information, especially if they live on the farm. People think they get that permission and I'm not going to talk to him because I'm afraid he'll tell me I can't come out here anymore. When if you would just go up and visit, he'll tell you there's a freaking giant buck that comes out of that corner right there under the apple tree about every third night. I mean, that's the kind of information you want, and they have it.
Sean, I guess one of the last things I have for you is, and maybe this is even in your personal case, when you engaged in a lease, I assume most of them are yearly leases, and then that property sold. Is there something in the agreements that talk about if the property sells, like, am I prorated my money back? Does the new landowner have the option to accept my lease? I guess something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. And my leases have been through base camp leasing.
Yep.
And there is something in the contract that says if the property is sold, that it'll be prorated. That depends a lot on how much I've been able to use the property, but typically base camp does a really nice job of going to the landowner and coming to an agreement on what you owe them back.
Yeah.
And it's never been an issue for me, obviously, but
I
think they do a great job.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because there were a couple properties that I had looked at that had people that were leasing on it, and it was a good way for me to engage with them. And one of the groups didn't want to talk, but the other one was, pretty open about what they'd seen. And one of them was just a big turkey hunter. And frankly, I was like, man, listen, like, we could probably, if I ever bought this place, I could probably work something out with you because I don't care. Like, go shoot as many turkeys as you want. But I think it's interesting when you look at that.
Great point.
Right?
Great point. When we talk about hunters being, landowners or people that are interested in leasing their property, dude, if you can just lease the turkey hunting rights, like, how about it?
I've thought about it, even on my new Ohio place. Like, I've got one of our buddies
Look at us turning over all kind of rocks. That's interesting.
Well, because we talk
you
about
could lease mushroom rights. I guarantee you.
Yeah. Oh, I know you could
lease mushroom hunting rights.
I know plenty of suckers that would lease my turkey hunting rights.
100%, man. And these guys will pay. And it's listen. Some of these guys just have certain passions for things like turkey. Like, they live to turkey hunt. They deer hunt, but they live to turkey hunt. I don't. I like turkey hunting, but I live to deer hunt. And so if they want to come in and they want to, lease my turkey hunting for the spring, have at it, man. I got plenty of other places to go kill turkey if I want, But it is interesting when you break this thing down, because far too often I think people just think in their head it's like, well, I might hunt it, but I don't know, so do I really want to give up the full year? You don't have to. You can give up gun season. You can give up bow season. You can give up muzzleloader season. You can give up turkey season. You can split this thing up any which way you want. Yeah.
Oh, you're right. You're going to get more value for an annual lease as a landowner.
Absolutely.
You're going to get more money.
Absolutely.
But
no doubt.
But depends on what you want. We've got people like, I don't want to tell my kids that they can't hunt out there. Well, slice off a piece for them.
Yeah.
They know what they want to hunt.
Yeah.
Take off that 50 acres and then lease the other.
That's a really good point. And I think that when you look at that, like, I am a land manager, right? So I know I'm busy doing food plots and timber stand improvement here in the spring. Yeah, I'm going to take the kids turkey hunting once or twice, but if I look at it, I might be able to get $2,500 to have people lease my turkey rights on my farm this year. And hell, that pays for 2 months of mortgage.
Interesting.
Why not?
Simple math, isn't it?
Simple math, man. Well, Sean, before we let you go, where's the best place for everybody to check out the American Hunting Lease Association and just even in the different plans and packages that you guys offer?
So you can find us at ahuntinglease.org.
Okay.
Very simple. We've got all the, not just the policies, we've got all the information, the education, the guidance, all that stuff that you might have as a landowner or a hunter that just might not know how this exactly works. Not just the coverage, but how leasing works. What are the liabilities? What are your responsibilities? So we really want to be proactive in promoting that concept, not just selling insurance. Once you become a member, you can get coverage for up to 499 acres, like I said, for $235. We have vacant land coverage, we have hunting lease coverage, and we also offer guides and outfitters liability coverage, which has kind of changed the game for guides and outfitters because the insurance industry saw all guides and outfitters as taking their clients on horseback into the Rocky Mountains for 10 days and then coming back. And basically I went to them and I was like, that's not the case at all. I got guys in Maryland who meet their clients at a Motel 6, they take them duck hunting for the day, and then they bring them back.
Yep.
And so we've tried to kind of bridge that gap between what's affordable and what's not. But ahuntinglease.org, everything you need's there. And call us anytime. We're sitting in Indiana. We've got a full staff. Our number is 866-782-6330. We will answer the phone every time, and we will be happy to talk to anybody anytime.
Perfect, man. That's awesome.
Cool.
Well, listen, Sean, we appreciate you being on the About a Farm podcast. Really cool to get into the insurance talk and access and all the opportunities that really exist around even just hunting leases and land ownership in general. And yeah, man, we'll have to get you back on here as we get closer to the season, see how things are shaping back up.
Well, I know insurance talk's not the sexiest conversation you probably have had.
That's all right.
I appreciate the opportunity, man. I really do. Thank you so much.
All right, buddy. We'll talk soon. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. Take it easy.
Cool. Yeah, good talk. It's interesting, because if people listen to us on the hunter side, we're not anti-lease by any means. In fact, we still have several leases in Kansas. I've got one in Kentucky. We let go of a bunch of leases this year in, I guess, response to us wanting to buy more property and use that cash to.
We also leased new properties that we've never leased before.
Correct. But I think what I really like with what he's doing at AHLA is he is going to provide you with the tools to make that one-on-one landowner connection. And dude, that is number one. I think that's how you get the better leasing properties, because you can walk to somebody who's never leased their property before, who's not in a conglomerate for leasing, and say, lease me the property.
Well, and we didn't really get into it, but like, I won't lease through. We're not going to lease through an organization anymore.
Yep.
You need to go and seek out landowner relations. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's based on that relationship. Yeah, I understand.
And he's giving you the tools for it. Like to be able to say, hey, before you say anything, I just want you to know that I've already got insurance. Here's the certificate. Here's everything. I actually have a legalized agreement for us that you can look through. And if you've got any questions, let me know.
So I like that a lot. It is a shame that we're not in a world anymore where you can go knock on a door, say, hey, can I hunt? They say, yeah. Mm-hmm. Or even before that, it's just nobody posted and it was what it was. But I appreciate, what Sean's company is offering here, and that it's like now in today's day and age, we can still go and get permission. It could be in the form of a lease. Obviously, the terms of that lease are totally up to the landowner and the hunter to decide on. But either way, they're both protected. There's a relationship there that's structured and a document that these guys are providing, and it's a valuable resource.
I mean, I think that it is the gateway to buying your dream property. That doesn't mean that it doesn't come up to listing properties and stuff. But listen, the market is competitive. When it hits the market and you're dealing with, the bigger market of it being on a real estate listing, it's a high demand marketplace. If you are local to an area and a farm you want to buy, and you think that it's an aging landowner or something, you better go engage with that person, because at some point it's going to hit an open market. And to your point, it's going to find the true value, whether it's via auction or just being on the real estate market.
Yeah.
So if you want to head that out, you need to probably get in and at least try to form a relationship with that property owner before then.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. I think that it's interesting, like, as we talk about these things, like, dude, I just realize how dynamic all these situations are. Like, not any one of these things that we're talking about is right for every person or even in every situation. I mean, dude, we're buying, we're leasing. Obviously, there's everything in between, too.
Everything.
There's not any one right answer. And so, like, I know people will watch this podcast and be like, well, this doesn't work for me, or why would you say that, or this and that. And it's like, dude, just you know,
open mind.
just be aware of these tools. Listen to these discussions and just have them in your back pocket to say, hey, I've heard this discussed. Maybe this situation, like this landowner's not willing to buy. I really want to buy it, but
maybe it has to be a lease.
Be aware of the tools that you can use to ultimately gain what you're trying to achieve with that.
That's it. Well, we appreciate everyone listening to episode 3 of I Bought a Farm. Appreciate Sean showing up and talking liabilities and insurance with us. And we will catch you guys on the next episode.
Later.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode of the I Bought a Farm podcast, make sure you check it out every other Thursday night on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and any other place that you might find your favorite podcast.